Good morning, everyone. My name is Goldy Simmons. I currently serve as the Director of Strength and Conditioning for the Chicago White Sox. Today, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about our assessment process during spring training and kind of how we develop an individualized program for an individual based on those assessments. Just before we get going, just a little bit of a disclosure statement. I do not have any conflicts of interest with any of the modalities or equipment you see talked about throughout the duration of this presentation. Again, just a little bit of the performance process, sort of the diagnostics and interventions that ensued prior to developing an individualized plan and program for these athletes. Some of the key indicators to that process, it really starts with organizational values and expectations. You know, what is it that your organization values the most? You know, what are they after? What are they looking for as an organization? And then that's ultimately going to create the blueprint for how you assess and develop programming for individuals. And then the personnel. This is the personal thought here for me. You know, it really depends on the people that you have, you know, executing, you know, your initiatives throughout the entirety of your system or organization. You know, executing a plan really takes, you know, having individuals that are bought in, not only from a staffing standpoint, but a player standpoint as well. And the personnel that you have driving that process is going to make the difference here. And then it's the type of athletes. You know, what kind of athletes do you have? You have larger athletes that move slower but are very powerful. You know, do you have, you know, smaller athletes that are very quick, very reactive, very fast? Because again, that's also going to go into creating an individualized plan and process for certain athletes. And then, as always, effective communication between, you know, the staff, you know, the medical staff, the coaching staff, the performance staff. It's a very cyclical process that entails, you know, effective communication across all entities. So we'll just kind of start with the draft. I know some organizations do a really good job at having individuals, you know, help the scouting departments seek and identify certain talents in terms of movement qualities, the makeup of athletes, which is really awesome. And then from that inception after the draft, you know, it starts with, you know, your general assessments, you know, looking at body comp. You know, you have a movement screen, power assessments. As we know, baseball is a linear, vertical, and rotational power sport, but it's also very reactive in nature. And then down here at the bottom, the strength assessments, you know, looking at upper body strength, lower body strength. This is kind of the skeleton that we use to devise and create a plan of attack when it comes to programming and assessments. You know, from that information, you'll go ahead and, you know, develop a needs analysis. And essentially what you're going to do is just kind of expose the lowest hanging fruit. You know, initially with movement, you know, you never want to load dysfunction. So with that movement portion, you're really just going to try to devise and determine, you know, do they move enough? You know, do they move well enough to load that, you know, whatever it may be, you know, the hinge, the spot patterns, pull patterns, you know, do they move optimally first and foremost? And essentially, you're just gonna create windows of opportunity to have a conversation with surrounding staff and the player in regard to, you know, not only movement but the capacity for these athletes to execute. You know, the accelerative qualities, the strength qualities, the power development, and then you're gonna look at their psychological stance. You know, are they an individual that needs, you know, motivation to express intent? You know, is that their, you know, is that where they leak? Is that where they lack? And then that's something that you can talk about with, you know, your sports psychologist if you have one of those on staff. If that's the case, if the aforementioned, the general movement capacity are not an issue, sometimes it tends to just be a psychological intervention that'll help these athletes. So we talk about, you know, movement proficiency as being the, you know, the primary, you know, staple in devising a program. You know, do they move well enough to execute, you know, loaded patterns? And that's essentially just a a ground up approach, that joint by joint, are they mobile, stable in the areas they need to be? And then you'll look at their neuromuscular development, their training age, are they young? Have they done these things before? Is it just something where you just need to hammer that pattern so they can grow into moving optimally? And then just looking at, do they lack range of motion in certain areas that's limiting them as an individual from doing certain things they need to do in the weight room? Is it a stability issue? Do they have the range of motion but just no control through that movement pattern? And these are things that we can discuss, with various entities, including the medical staff, performance staff, and devise, a mode of attack for, what is actually going on with this individual, based on that movement proficiency score. And then here, essentially what we do is we're going to combine, the aforementioned tests and assessments to try to build this engine block, right? Like, I'm sure this is nothing new, kind of preaching to the choir here, but you're going to take that integrated, that movement assessment, whatever that is for your organization, and combine that with, that linear vertical rotational power. You're just going to try to put the pieces together to build this capacity, that engine that's going to drive everything that they need to do on the field, right? Because that's the goal, is to get them on the field, to be able to move optimally, to go ahead and express, modes of strength and power at optimal levels on the field. So when we look at programming, we kind of look at that general, right? Like that movement, the joint by joint approach, the mobility, stability, the flexibility, how well they control, that movement, that dynamic stability, what do they look like in motion? And then you're going to look at the capacity, that engine block, how well are they developed, how much work is going to need to be put into that development. And then you're going to look at that energy system, do they have capacity to continue to progress this, this engine, you know what I mean? Are they going to be able to drive this engine? And how well are they going to recover from bouts of trying to drive that engine? And essentially what we're trying to do here is program to transform, those weaknesses into strengths. And how we do that is we're going to look at the data. We're going to look at the baseline, metrics and variables that kind of went into, the program, looking at levels of relative strength, looking at the power output and comparing that amongst, the norms or, your entire organization, just to devise what it is that this individual actually needs. Because we want to process these elements objectively, right? Which takes, communication amongst the staff to ensure that we're actually giving this athlete what they actually need. And then we're going to monitor this over time inside of our program. So when we talk about the communication piece, we're going to look at the performance in what it is that we found with the movement screen, the power assessments, and then we're going to take that and confirm that with the medical data, right? Is an actual issue that needs to be addressed? Oftentimes we kind of see one side of the spectrum and it's not necessarily needed to be addressed. And, we kind of missed the bar here with addressing actual limitations without, getting confirmation from the medical staff with actual range of motion. So when you can put that cycle together, you're able to process individuals more objectively based on the data derived from those assessments. So here you kind of look at, relative strength, which, we kind of look at strength before power. Here is kind of like an organizational snapshot, but this can also be done on an individual level to kind of process, and develop that program based on that individual's actual needs. But it just gives you an idea of that bilateral to unilateral strength characteristic that'll go into developing and optimizing a program. And you'll see how this kind of swings back later with some of the force characteristics that we derive off of force plate usage. And essentially, the force decks are basically just going to be used to identify and evaluate an athlete's execution or skill relative to their physical development. And essentially, force plates do a really good job at this, with depicting that interaction between that athlete and the ground. How well do they respond to the forces that they generate? And can they maintain this over time? And we look at that, unilaterally and bilaterally. And then, some force plates are just vertical. They don't really get that horizontal plane, but you can actually look at this information, via single axis or multi-axis, to kind of depict, how these athletes react to the ground. And here you kind of see like their electronic signature based on, counter movement jump or squat jump or whatever it may be. And here you see there's areas where you see that eccentric, concentric propulsion and kind of that displacement time. But this is essentially where we get a snapshot of just actually how that individual reacts with the ground, and the frequency to which they interact with the ground, which is what makes force plates very, very, very successful in nature when it comes to developing and optimizing programs. One of the variables that comes from using force decks or force plates is that reactive strength. And again, this kind of goes back to the ground reaction forces created by the athlete when you look at that electronic signature, so to speak. And it basically just kind of measures, the explosive qualities an athlete possesses. How fast do they react? How much force do they generate? And how well do they respond to the force that they generate? And again, there's a couple ways of looking at this with certain jump characteristics, to a drop jump or counter movement jump, where you're looking at, slow, short stretch shortening cycles or versus fast, short stretch shortening cycles with the drop jump. And again, essentially, we're just looking at, maximal force and a minimal amount of time. Shoshone did a pretty good job here with kind of capturing, based on that relative strength. And this is where having that relative strength, when you look at lower and upper body strength testing, gives you an idea of how to program certain plyometrics to increase power development based on that relative strength. So here, just kind of a generic snapshot of how you would program certain things, for an athlete based on, those force jump characteristics and ground reaction forces, or if you need to develop and optimize a program if an individual expresses a lack thereof. Some of the practical uses of RSI, a lot of people use it as a readiness and a monitoring tool. But again, just as a mode of addressing it, you kind of look at the strength, the relative strength, the capacity, as we mentioned before, or sort of the skill, like the general movement. And essentially what you're aiming to do is improve limb stiffness, their tendon strength, the rate of force development, tendon elasticity, and again, just kind of monitoring this athlete over time, just to kind of make sure that, they're able to give everything they have at a particular moment. And when we start to see, peaks and troughs with, the RSI, we know that we need to either take away or they're actually in a better spot and we can add more to a specific program. And based on, the reactive strength that they express, we kind of look at it as, an individual having low reactive strength or high reactive strength. And for individuals that, express rather low RSI, we tend to want to increase their strength. We look at pause reps, iso holds, things like that, things that are going to help attenuate that strength. And then, concurrently, we'll do that with plyometric work, jumps, assisted jumps, things that will keep them reactive in nature and get used to utilizing that stretch shortening cycle in a more effective and efficient manner. And then for athletes with high RSI, we'll kind of look at more intensive work, increased force application with more depth, different heights, play with different heights for that individual. And then, multi-directional versus directional, just kind of playing with the reactive capability as they already attain it. It's more about just retaining those reactive capabilities. So here's just a little bit of a case study. An athlete kind of expressed with a counter movement jump, their force, their force time curve, their signature, so to speak, and you confirm that information with that normative data, and then what you'll start to see is that an athlete is either actually really, really good or actually, really, really bad, and that'll kind of give you an idea of how you need to address these issues with individualized plan. And then also too, we look at kinematic sequencing. So, what is, them and range, them, going through certain ranges of motion, what does that look like once you get an actual snapshot? And you'll start to see for certain athletes, like you'll see velocity, acceleration tends to be lacking. And that's where that velocity-based training will come into play once you get a deeper snapshot of what they look like via biomechanics analysis, as we did here. Again, you'll start to see pelvis rotation, acceleration. You start to see those, those words, acceleration, velocity, they're lacking, which means the intent may be an issue for that individual. So here, it's also important to that to have like a visual. Sometimes just numbers and things on a sheet don't really tell the full story. When you can actually get that video encryption, that video description of what an athlete is actually doing in time and space, it could actually help you optimize your programming. So here we'll kind of look at this individual, just kind of do just a quick counter movement jump. As you can see, you have some knee collapse. Athlete gets pretty good distance from the ground, a rather large individual. And then you look at the drop jump here. How well do they respond to the ground and the impact they create? And then in totality, you possess, a guided prescription, which I think Mayberry et al., I think it's 2018, did a really nice job. And I think they worked with Sparta a little bit with their output in an article, which kind of looked at certain variables, certain force time characteristics, and how to program based on that information that they received from athletes with their counter movement jumps and squat jumps and things like that. So here we just put together, based on those variables, and you'll see like the verbiage is a little bit different across the board. So you'll have to do a little bit of homework just to kind of devise, what is actually being stated relative to concentric and eccentric variables. But once you have that in place, there's an optimal prescription for certain movements to help, those lacking variables. If an athlete is deficient in this or that, you can prescribe, based on the data that is derived from their jumps. And then again, with the programming, just as a hypothetical example, this athlete needed to increase concentric mean force output for body mass. And again, based on, that study with Mayberry, they did a really nice job of kind of giving you a plan and prescription based on the jump data. This athlete needs deadlifts, you know what I mean? They need that bilateral pull to increase concentric, mean force. So that athlete will be prescribed that in a plan on top of, regular plyometric training. And then also the VBT, the use of GymAware and things that look at velocity will also help the intent of an athlete to increase that power output over time. And then just as important as it is to sort of put a plan in place, it's important to monitor that over time. So, and essentially what you'll be looking for is that coefficient of variation over time. So with RSI, which is something that is very important to an athlete's, training, and looking at that neuromuscular fatigue, or not, or lack thereof. You can see the peaks and troughs here, are very sparse. You'll start to see big dips. This is where you'll have a conversation either with the athlete or the surrounding staff as the interventions that are necessary. Do we need to take something away? Do we need to add a little bit more? But essentially, you kind of monitor this over time. and that'll tell you where an athlete actually is and what you need to do as far as your plan in place and exercise prescription. And again, here Vol did a really nice job for us in developing jumping reports. And essentially this kind of just gives you a snapshot of where your athletes are. Are they making improvements? Are they staying pretty steady relative to their means, the team means? And it essentially just helps you with that programming process. You know, are they doing well? Are they not? Is there something going on? Is there an injury that could be potentially happening? You know, you see guys in the green that are doing really well, guys in the gray that are kind of just, you know, steady state. And then there's guys in the red that are falling, you know, a little bit below that standard deviation of their mean. And that's where you just have a conversation with that individual. Are they tired? You know, is there something going on? Has something increased? Has workload on the field increased? You know, and then it also affords you the opportunity to look at your programming. You know, is there something in there that's being used in excess that we need to take away from, kind of back down to see that, you know, these numbers go back up and put that athlete back in the green in terms of readiness and freshness. So again, just something quick, you know, nothing changing the game here, so to speak, but just giving everybody a little idea of how to go about programming based on that assessment process during spring training. But again, some of the key takeaways, you know, your organization ultimately drives your performance initiative. You know, that's where the communication to the process, you know, starting with the front office, you know, what is it they believe in? You know, what is it they want to see, you know, out of these athletes? And that's going to help you create the blueprint and devise a plan of attack for, you know, for the programming based on the assessments, or even help you create the assessment process to begin with. And then again, here, the best program is the one that's completed. You know, nothing is, in terms of programming, is excellent or perfect. Essentially, you know, when you can get a guy to do something or individuals to do something, essentially, you know, having them complete something is better than nothing. So the best program ultimately is the one that's going to be completed at the end of the day. And then again, that revolving communication between medical, coaching, performance, that ultimately is gonna drive program confirmation. That's gonna give you that objective feedback of what actually needs to be done, or what can be omitted. And then, you know, we like this quote here by Sheryl Sandberg: "Done is better than perfect." And again, I think that circles back to the best program is the one that's going to be completed. So in the end, you know, getting guys to do something is better than nothing. And when you can get them to do something, you know, then you can kind of dive in and develop a highly individualized program based on that objective data and feedback that you get from those assessments. I'd like to go ahead and thank the PBSCCS, its board members and members for allowing me to speak to you guys today. The Chicago White Sox, Kansas City organizations for giving me an opportunity in professional baseball to be here to speak in front of you today. Everybody on the call, the webinar, I know it's middle of the season, lots going on, everybody's busy. So I thank you for taking the time to kind of listen here. So again, thank you.